Thank you, Andrew. Ladies and gentlemen, hobos and tramps, cross-eyed mosquitoes, and bow-legged ants. That was an intro to a speech I gave back in 1947 when Ed and I were in the 4th grade, and I've been waiting for the perfect chance to use it again. Well, as we talked about, I was a folk singer in the 60s, and Ed and I lived together in L.A. in 64, and I was playing all those folk clubs around, and I learned about 200 or 300 folk songs when I was in college, and along the way began to make a living doing it. So the first tune we're going to play for you is a gussied up arrangement of a world-famous English folk song I learned back then, Greensleeves. Well, you know, Greensleeves is a folk song from the early 15th century and probably England's most famous folk song melody, sort of a song for all season. You know, Greensleeves melody, for example, was the melody for one of the Christmas carols, What Child Is This? Back in Oklahoma, I had a version of Greensleeves that I played in the summer when it was hot, and it went like this. It's called Short Sleeves. And it was very popular because not only did we wear them, but it left plenty of time to make the biggest hit of all, a glass of iced tea. Right, Mac and Ed? Well, you know, these are all sort of personal connections that we're going to do in this show. And the reason I played Greensleeves first was when I wrote that arrangement, I actually lived in a house that was across the freeway from where the Getty is. And this was in 68 and 69, and the Getty wasn't there yet. And right out my kitchen window, I could see that empty hillside. And the house belonged to Howard Taylor, who was Elizabeth Taylor's brother. And I used to, wonder if only these walls could talk. And I was pretty sure they'd have an English accent if they could. And and I like the idea that 40 years later, I'm at the Getty, playing across the freeway toward my kitchen window. Let's see. I gotta switch guitars here. That was an instrumental version of a folk song, but of course, most of the folk songs I learned back then had words to them. So I thought I'd sing one for you, and this is one that I still enjoy singing. It's called The Water is Wide. Scotch-Irish ballad, probably 250 years old. It's also known by its original title, Waly Waly. Water is wide, I can't cross over, and neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row, my love and I. A ship there is that sails the sea. She's loaded deep can be, but not so deep as the love I'm in. I know not how I sink or swim. Great song, isn't it? Yeah, what a melody. Well, Ed and I went on active duty in the Navy in 1962, and I was stationed at the Amphibs base in Coronado. Ed was a swabby in the Navy, and he had to unlace to piss, as they used to say. I should explain that That was what the Marines used to yell at the sailors down in San Diego. Hey, Swabby, you got to unlace the piss, don't you? And, of course, the sailors' comeback was, oh, yeah, death before dishonor? That means you'd rather die than blush? So Ed and I stayed out of those kind of things because wanting to play guitar and paint wasn't necessarily conducive to fistfights. But anyway, during this time, I wrote a series of poems called Them Poems, and I showed them to Ed and Joe Good and Mac, and they seemed to get a kick out of them, so they are the ones that inspired me to write more of these. I wrote about 24 of them over a 2-year period. They were actually my first commercial success. The Kingston Trio recorded some of them on their albums, and I did them in my act as well. And, you know, as a folk singer, you had to have comedy in your act, and I was always making up intros for things I did, and here was the intro for Them Toadsuckers. I don't really know anybody that is a toadsucker, or at least that admits it, but there is a guy here in L.A. that I'm suspicious of. And the reason is, on his coffee table, he's got an aquarium with toads in it, and there's not a lot of green left in them. And as soon as you sit down, they kind of move back against the glass, kind of like this. Look up in terror, and so you kind of figure something has been after them. But if toad sucking goes on seriously somewhere, it's got to be down south because they've got the toads for it. And you know, there are toad jumping contests, so why not toad sucking contests? I don't know what the rules would be. I guess if you swallowed one, you're disqualified. So here they are, them toadsuckers, wherever they are and who they are. How about them toadsuckers, ain't they, Claude? Sitting there sucking them green toady frogs, sucking them hop toads, sucking them chunkers, sucking them leapy types, sucking them plunkers. Look at them toadsuckers, ain't they snappy? Sucking them bog frogs, sure makes them happy. Them hugger mugger toadsuckers way down south, sticking them sucky toads in they mouth. How to be a toadsucker, no way to duck it. Get yourself a toad, rear back and suck it. Here's one called them moose goosers, and I was partially raised in Oregon, and I used to love to get out in the woods and see the critters that were there, and you know, there was beaver and marten and deer and even bears and whatnot. Never saw any moose. So I wrote the Forest Service a letter, and I said, how come you don't see any moose in Oregon? They said, well, they're all up in Canada. And I said, well, couldn't you guys sort of start a branch of the Forest Service known as the Moose Goosers and goose a few moose down our way so we could have some in our woods? Kind of like the smoke jumpers, a little different, I guess. But they even had an insignia design for them. It was flying thumbs. And so I wrote this poem for them, and I never heard back from them. But you know how the government is, they just don't respond to good ideas sometimes.